There are moments in history when one side of a conflict achieves something so far ahead of its time that the other side simply has no answer, not a partial answer, not a temporary solution, no answer at all. The Cold War was filled with technological rivalries, nuclear weapons, space exploration, ballistic missiles, but few achievements were as complete, as absolute, and as quietly devastating as what the United States accomplished in the skies above Soviet territory. At a time when the Soviet Union had built one of the most sophisticated air defense networks in history, filled with radar systems, interceptor jets, and surface-to-air missiles designed to stop any intruder, the Americans introduced something that simply ignored all of it. Not avoided, not countered, ignored. An aircraft so fast, so high, and so advanced that for decades it flew exactly where it wanted, whenever it wanted, and no one could stop it. This was the SR-71 Blackbird, a machine that didn't just give the United States an advantage, it made them untouchable. At the height of the Cold War, information was everything. Knowing where Soviet missiles were positioned, where their submarines were docked, where their troops were moving, that intelligence could mean the difference between surviving a war and losing one before it even began. Deep inside Soviet territory, entire military complexes operated in secrecy, hidden behind layers of defense that made traditional reconnaissance almost impossible. Early attempts like the Lockheed U-2 managed to exploit altitude as their main advantage, flying higher than Soviet defenses could initially reach. For a time, it worked, but that illusion didn't last. The Soviets were tracking these aircraft from the very beginning, patiently improving their systems until, in May of 1960, they proved a brutal point. A U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory. Powers survived, was captured, and the incident became one of the most embarrassing moments of the Cold War for the United States. The message was clear: if America wanted to maintain its intelligence advantage, it needed something far beyond what already existed. What followed wasn't a committee decision, it was a phone call to one man, Clarence Kelly Johnson, the engineering genius behind Lockheed's secretive Skunk Works division. Johnson had already given the world the U-2. Now he was being asked to do the impossible: build an aircraft that no missile, no radar, and no interceptor could ever catch. The project was so classified that most of the people building it didn't know what it was for. Its very existence was denied by the government for years. What emerged was something closer to science fiction than a conventional plane. The Blackbird was designed to fly above Mach 3, more than 3 times the speed of sound, at altitudes approaching 85,000 feet. Commercial aircraft cruise at around 35,000 feet. The SR-71 flew more than twice as high, in air so thin that the sky above the cockpit appeared nearly black, and the curvature of the Earth was visible to its pilots. At those speeds, friction heated the outer skin to temperatures exceeding 300 degrees Celsius, hot enough to destroy conventional aircraft structures. Engineers turned to titanium as the primary material, and here's where the story becomes almost absurd. The largest supplier of aerospace-grade titanium in the world at the time was the Soviet Union. The United States secretly purchased the very material it needed to build the aircraft that would spy on the Soviets, from the Soviets themselves. Even the fuel was unlike anything that had existed before. Standard jet fuel would ignite spontaneously at the temperatures the SR-71 operated in. Engineers developed a special formula called JP7, so chemically stable that you could drop a lit match into it and it would simply go out. The engines shifted behavior as speed increased, converting into something closer to ramjets at full cruise. Everything about this aircraft existed for one purpose: to be unreachable. Flying it was another matter entirely. SR-71 pilots weren't just elite, they were a category unto themselves. Before approaching the aircraft, a pilot spent an hour breathing pure oxygen in a sealed pressure suit to prevent decompression sickness at altitude. Once sealed inside and climbing toward the edge of space, the pilot was essentially an astronaut managing systems no other aircraft had ever required. The experience of Mach 3 cruise was described not as violent, but as eerily smooth. A city would appear on the horizon and vanish behind the tail in under a minute. One pilot described crossing the entire continental United States in under 68 minutes. The aircraft didn't just move fast, it existed in a different relationship with time and space than anything else in the sky. And that's exactly what made it so frustrating for the Soviet Union. Their defenses weren't weak. Far from it. The Soviet air defense network combined ground-based radar installations, surface-to-air missile batteries, and high-performance interceptors coordinated through a centralized command structure. On paper, it should have been enough. In practice, against the SR-71, it was useless. They deployed the MiG-25 Foxbat, an interceptor that could reach speeds approaching Mach 3 and altitudes above 70,000 feet. When Western intelligence first encountered it, there was genuine alarm. But the reality was more complicated. The MiG-25 could briefly touch those speeds, but doing so pushed its engines to the absolute limit, risking catastrophic failure. It was a sprinter being asked to run a marathon. The SR-71, by contrast, cruised at those speeds, routinely, reliably, for extended periods. The Soviets launched hundreds of surface-to-air missiles at SR-71s during reconnaissance missions. Every single one missed. A missile fired at an aircraft traveling over 2,000 miles per hour at 80,000 feet faces a targeting problem no guidance system of that era could solve. By the time the missile reached the SR-71's altitude, the aircraft was already miles away. Pilots would sometimes observe the launches from the cockpit, small, bright flares rising from the earth, and simply accelerate. The standard procedure when a missile was detected wasn't evasion, it was acceleration. The aircraft's answer to every threat was the same: go faster. In 1976, a Soviet pilot named Viktor Bedlenko defected, flying his MiG-25 to Japan and handing Western intelligence one of the most valuable gifts of the Cold War. When engineers examined the aircraft, they discovered it was built with vacuum tubes rather than transistors in many of its systems, older technology than expected. More importantly, its radar and missiles confirmed what SR-71 pilots already knew. The Foxbat had no realistic ability to intercept a Blackbird at full speed and altitude. The gap wasn't close, it was absolute. In its entire operational history, the SR-71 was never shot down, never damaged by enemy action. Every missile fired at it missed. Every interceptor scrambled against it failed. When it was finally retired in 1998, it held world records for speed and altitude that have never been broken by a piloted aircraft. Those records still stand today. What the SR-71 represented wasn't just a technological achievement. It was proof of what becomes possible when engineering ambition operates without compromise. The Soviets were building missiles designed to hit aircraft flying at certain speeds and altitudes. The Americans built an aircraft that simply didn't fly at those speeds and altitudes. They didn't win the game. They changed what game was being played. Even today, more than half a century after its first flight, nothing has surpassed it. The Blackbird remains the most extreme piloted aircraft ever to enter regular service. Not just a symbol of Cold War dominance, but a permanent reminder of what happens when one side manages to move faster than the other can possibly respond.